Hello there everybody, this is Speckblocklime here with another video reaction for all of you today. In the video we're going to do reaction to is the channel, from the channel Mr. Ballin. The video is titled Uninhabited Island with Dark History, the missing crew of the Sarah Joe. So obviously I'm going to guess Sarah Joe is a boat, unless it could be a plane, but I feel it's more a boat. And I guess they're gonna just talk about what happened and maybe what happened and why maybe they're gone and maybe what could have happened. I don't know. There's a lot of speculation about that. Never heard this story. Heard a lot of missing stories of boat stuff, but never. I don't think this one specifically. Before we get onto the video, I just want to say ahead of time, if you guys want to watch the original, go to the channel, watch the video. If you don't want to complain and or get mad that I'm talking over parts, I'm talking about things. That's the point. This is a reaction video, and reaction channels do that. You know, we'll talk, most of the time we'll catch almost everything that's being talked about or shown, but we're gonna be talking, and if anything is missed, well, you know, it's a little bit missed. We'll probably rewatch some of these videos people do again in the future on our own time, and maybe we'll catch some then. I'm just saying ahead of time, this is what it is, the reaction channel, reaction videos. So without further ado, let's get on to the video and see what this is all about.
Maritime history is full of unexplained phenomenon and tall tales of sea monsters and mariners going out and returning in different parts of the world and not knowing how they got there.
Crazy
all these
stories.
crazy things that happen out on
which is probably why I don't think I would ever want to like go on a little boat or anything. If I ever go somehow on a boat to something like that's gonna travel far, maybe a cruise ship, maybe.
Is absolutely as fascinating as some of these very tall tales,
but not like in a little boat by myself. Even with some people, I don't think I would want.
It's the story of the lost Hawaiian fisherman. So the too long didn't read version of this story is you have 5 highly experienced Hawaiian fishermen that take off on a daytime fishing trip. The weather turns really bad while they're out on the water and they don't return. Despite an extensive search effort, they are not located, and after a year, the families and friends of the lost fishermen, they host a memorial service and assume that their loved ones are gone forever.
Okay.
9 years later, they make a discovery on a very small island 2,300 miles away that calls into question the entire story. It's an amazing story. It's a tragic story, but it's one worth listening to right to the very end. Before we get started, if you are into strange and mysterious stories like the one I've just described, my channel is going to be a bevy of content just like that. And so if you could gently liquidate... If you could gently liquidate... I can't even say it. If you could gently liquidate the like button... If you could gently liquidate the like button and subscribe and turn on all notifications, that would be great. Scott Moorman was born in 1952 in the San Fernando Valley in California. At a young age, he loved the show Adventures in Paradise, which was about this crew of young sailors that would travel the South Pacific looking for adventure and passengers to pick up along the way. And it was just this brilliant show to him. And he became obsessed with living in the South Pacific when he got older. Specifically, he wanted to live in Hawaii. But that wouldn't necessarily happen right away because at a young age, he got married and had a son and stayed in California. But in 1975, he and his wife split up. And so he took that as an opportunity to go...
I'm going to get left the kid with the wife.
Living in Hawaii. And so he, on his own, his son stayed with his former wife. He, Scott, moves out to the east coast of Maui on Hawaii. And he moves into this little town called Nahiku. Now, Nahiku was full of lots of native Hawaiians and a growing population of kind of like refugees in a way, Vietnam veterans who were over living in the mainland. You have hippies and kind of earth-loving people that do a lot more partying than working. They were all kind of congregating in this same town. And Scott, he loved that culture and he quickly became a part of it. But he also, unlike a lot of the kind of hippies that made their way to Nahiku, that were part of that growing population, Scott really wanted to kind of become a part of the whole culture of Nahiku, because he growing up, he loved Hawaii. He didn't want to be the kind of the others on the island. He wanted to be a part of the main culture, and so he took it upon himself to learn the sort of pidgin English that locals would use.
So he liked both of them, but obviously the main thing he wanted, because it's part of the adventure and the
really went out of his way to try to befriend some of the locals. And while
real life
he wasn't really embraced as, you know, a kind of local, he did form a number of friendships with local Hawaiians, and in time he really felt like this is where he belongs. This was home to him 100%.
Part of the
he would only go back to California
locality.
He goes back once for his son's birthday, and he also sees his parents while he's there, and they are all pleading with him to come back, you know, be with your family. They want him to stay, and he says, no, Nahiku is where I belong, and I can't envision myself living anywhere else.
It's his freedom.
When he flies back after that one visit to California for his son's birthday, when he flies back to Nahiku, that will be the last time that his son, his former wife, and his parents, his family, back in the mainland would see him.
Oh, no.
They would see him. On February 11th,
I think everybody should be allowed to have their freedom, but if you're going to do it, be honest about how you feel about things.
They all worked construction together. Instead, they're going to go fishing, because they all love to fish, and the weather was beautiful.
Like, I know some kids want their parents to stay, but if their parents just really can't and doesn't feel like it, you can't force it. It depends.
Boston whaler named the Sarah Joe. Their friend allowed them to use it.
Okay.
So they got their boat, they went to the store, got some beer, snacks, and got some ice for their big ice chest so they could pack it with the fish they caught, that they hopefully caught, and they were on their way. The part of Hawaii that Scott and his friends lived in, the east coast of Maui, at the time did not get any TV stations, and radio broadcasts were done maybe once a week, and were hard to pick up. So people in that area, especially fishermen and anybody that was out on the water, they were accustomed to going out without a weather report. They basically played the weather by their eye. They kind of just sized it up and said, does it seem okay?
Yeah, like
it seems good.
Back then, how some people predicted weather. They just went with what they could.
The locals were pretty good at it, and Scott and his buddies also were very good at this point at kind of reading the weather, and so they thought this day was going to be just fine. Now, in order to get to the place where they intended to fish, they would need to pass through something called the Alanui Haha Channel, which is considered to be one of the roughest and most dangerous areas for all sailors anywhere near Hawaii. So it's a dangerous place. It's at certain points, it is almost 7,000 feet deep. There's very strong surface currents. It's just a risky place to be if, for example, there was a big storm. Now, when Scott and the Sarah Joe crew took off, the water was calm.
And then I think if that boat was accurate, that seems like it's not a boat that could handle that stuff. Not to be mean.
The channel at this point, the weather was still very calm.
I'm sorry, but like,
however, a low pressure system.
It would have to be not a yacht per se, but a boat that looks like it can handle weather, and I don't know that thing can. If that's the correct boat that they were using. The picture Mr. Baldwin showed.
There was beginning to be torrential downpour all along the channel, and it eventually turned.
Hey, even professional boats that are meant for hard weather still have issues sometimes and stuff.
I mean, described this particular storm as being one of the worst they've seen in 50 plus years.
Unless that boat goes only around nearby the shore and you can still see the shore, I'm not getting on a boat like that.
Of the boats that took off to go fishing out of this east coast section of Maui, there was 4 fishing boats that went out. 3 returned. The one that didn't was, of course, the Sarah Joe. At 5 p.m., the Coast Guard is notified by their friends and family that they have not returned yet. The storm is still raging. You know, gale force winds, torrential downpour.
Crazy
storm. Still send out a plane to look overhead. A number of crews were sent out to go look for them.
In case anyone comments, and I've already said this before, if you don't hear me talking much, it's because I will say some things about the story, but I want to hear mostly the story. I will make comments when it makes sense or it's interesting.
They said that at best they could see maybe 50 feet in front of them, and even that was a stretch. So it was a limited search, but they did go out on the day of the storm. Over the next 5 days, the Coast Guard led a search that included 44 planes and boats covering a 56,000 square mile search block for the Sarah Joe, but nothing was found. there was absolutely no trace of them. And so after 5 days, unfortunately, the Coast Guard called off the
search. That's always why it's insane. If things disappear in the ocean, it's kind of hard to find evidence of it being around still.
These were incredibly capable, very experienced fishermen. They were all great swimmers. They believed that because they hadn't found a trace of them, that perhaps they were still alive out there. And so they, as a community, raised $50,000 to pay private ships and planes to continue the search. So there was an extended search that went on for a couple more weeks that covered an even bigger swath of territory, but at the end still yielded no results. The people that were doing the searching were just baffled, because when people go missing at sea, there's some indication a lot of times when they're just fishing basically right off the coast, there's some indication of what happened to them. It's rare that you would have 0%.
Yeah, I guess just an idea.
No idea what happened to these 5 fishermen. 1 year after their disappearance, the families and friends decide to host a memorial and mourn the loss.
I mean, yeah, it's been a year. You probably think that they're never coming back.
That they had all perished. 2,300 miles southwest of the Hawaiian Islands lies this tiny little stretch of...
That's far.
I guess you can call them islands, called the Taongi.
A few hundred is not bad, but that's literally thousands of miles away.
Barely sustained any life. There's a couple scrub plants that took hold here and there, but there's no fresh water. The only recorded human life that's ever been there was during World War II. A number of Japanese soldiers were stranded there briefly, but it is 200 miles from the nearest inhabited land. It's very far from any major shipping lane. It's just a place that, as a human being, you don't want to go.
Yeah.
In fact, it was actually considered when they were testing the atomic bomb, when the United States was, it was considered to be a great spot to test the atomic bomb because no one's there and no one's anywhere near it. So incredibly isolated.
Which makes me question why they didn't choose it, because they actually chose places like Bikini Atoll and people live there. Just saying.
Sent there by the Marshall Islands to find a suitable...
There were so many islands or little areas where they could have tested stuff like that and they had no people.
Within 30 minutes of arriving at the atoll, John and his crew saw what looked like a skeleton of a boat, a Boston whaler boat that was down on the shore. John was actually a resident of Maui, so he's from Hawaii, and he saw on the back of this kind of skeletal remains of this boat the letters HA, which means it's registered in Hawaii. And so he's intrigued because we're 2,300 miles from Hawaii, and he starts moving the sand away to get a better look to see if there's any more writing on the boat. And he makes out a couple of letters, an S, an R, an H, an O, an E, and he puts it together. He's like, this is the Sarah Joe. This is the boat that went missing 9 years earlier. And the reason he knew it that quickly,
almost a decade.
He was one of the people deeply involved in the search efforts to find these lost fishermen. He was like leading search groups. He was totally committed to finding them, and here he is in a crazy twist of fate.
Finding it after so long.
Away, almost a decade later, finding the boat. Now, the boat did not initially provide any sort of information about where the fishermen might be. There was nothing on it. It was just the wood, very degraded from water, wear and tear. But the crew decided that they would search the island and just kind of look around, because perhaps the crew, even if it was years and years ago, maybe they landed here and then they ultimately perished once they were here. So maybe we can find their remains.
Yeah,
or just some sign that they might have been
doubt,
here. John
life,
walks about 100 yards away from the Sarah Joe, and he sees what looks like kind of a crudely constructed cross out of driftwood. And below it, he can see that there's a bunch of rocks that have been placed definitely in some sort of decorative way, and it looks like a gravesite. And considering what they're looking for, he thinks there's the first.
Yeah, that's a good indication.
He calls over his crew.
Because a cross isn't necessarily for religious; it's just usually representative of death.
Just to be respectful, but a little ways down, the inside of the grave is not only bones, but they find this little book. The book had no writing in it, and it's hard to even call it a book. It was more like a stack of papers. But on each page, there was a little square cutout of tinfoil that sat on the page. Basically, every page had a little square of tinfoil and nothing else to it. No one knew what it meant, but undoubtedly, somebody had very clearly buried somebody else right here in a very shallow grave and had left this little book in here with whoever was buried here. And so while John and a couple of his crew are looking at this book and trying to make sense of it,
yeah, well,
one
kind
of
of
his
weird.
crew members that was just kind of standing back looking at the site commented that, you know, the bones that are in that grave, they're not very bleached. Now, if a bone's been sitting for a long time, it will basically bleach and become totally white. Everything comes off the bone.
Out in the sun, especially.
These bones looked relatively fresh. So whoever was buried here, they had been buried recently. At this point, John and his crew have basically abandoned their kind of wildlife sanctuary research, and now they're just scouring this little scrub of land in the Teongi Atoll,
just to
any other
be sure
of,
what happened,
things that could have
or
to do with the Sarah Joe crew.
Connections or stuff.
And they found nothing else. So they report back to the Coast Guard and alert the Marshallese authorities that what was found on the island, and they send out a couple of forensic experts to examine the bone. They were able to determine that the bones in the grave belonged to Scott Mormon. When news got back to the Hawaiian mainland that Scott Mormon had been found, the family members of the other 4 fishermen that went missing on the Sarah Joe,
well, yeah, they're gonna want to know if
private detectives to go
the others are there somewhere.
Look everywhere, see if you can find our loved ones.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you find one, you hope the others are there.
And a dive team and all these people are sent to the Teongi Atoll, and they.
So I just want to check how much time.
They're digging up the sand. They have dive teams going out into the water. I mean, they are really leaving no stone unturned. And all they're able to find is the outboard motor of the Sarah Joe, which was a little ways off the coast from where the boat itself was found, wedged in some coral. And then they also found a handful of more bones on the beach near where that shallow grave where Scott Mormon was buried. But those bones also belong to Scott Mormon. So there was nothing else found of the other 4 fishermen or any indication of what happened to the boat. There's nothing. And in fact, researchers that were able to look at the bones of Scott Mormon, there wasn't enough evidence there to help them determine a cause of death. So we don't even know how he passed away or when he passed away. However, it was determined just based on the bleaching of the bones that it was a relatively recent death. I don't know what the timeline is on that, but recent is the term that's used. While it was a very
I wonder what that would mean.
That they located Scott Mormon's remains on the Teongi Atoll, even though it was 10 years later. This is revelatory. This is a really big deal, not only for the families of the fishermen, but for anybody involved. This is a really big deal. But there was an additional revelation once Scott Mormon's bones were found that basically turned this case upside down. There's already a bunch of questions like who buried Scott Mormon? How did Scott Mormon become freshly buried almost a decade later? You know, how long had they been there? There's some basic questions.
Yeah, that's strange.
But there's one fact that nobody seems to be able to reconcile, and that was 6 years after they went missing. The Marshall Islands conducted a government survey of the Teongi Atoll, which would mean they scoured the islands, all those little strips of land that make up the Teongi Atoll. They scoured it.
They must have been near.
Taking measurements and basically mapping out the Teongi Atoll. I think it was in preparation for potentially turning it into this wildlife sanctuary. So they looked everywhere on the Teongi Atoll 6 years after the Sarah Joe.
That's interesting information.
So they go missing. 6 years later, there's this government survey of the Teongi Atoll. And guess what? They ended up looking at that survey, and there's no boat, there's no shallow grave, there's nothing. It's just an uninhabited strip of land, nothing else. There's no boats there. Experts, when this was revealed, said that, well, had they, the Sarah Joe, the crew of the Sarah Joe, gone dead in the water following the storm, they could have drifted the 2,300 miles to the Teongi Atoll in roughly 3 months. But they weren't there at the 6-year mark. So what were they doing between the disappearance and the 6-year mark? Which
the disappearance and then the 3 months to probably get there, and then the 6 years when the island was checked or that area.
Gap where no one can account for where they were. Even if they made it to the Teongi Atoll 6 years and a day after they had disappeared, that they had been somehow surviving in the open ocean for 6 years, and they just so happened to land at the Taongi Atoll.
That theory that somehow they were still out in the ocean for 6 years and then they got there
Let's say
later.
They make it there. Who buried Scott Moorman? And what was the booklet that was buried with him with the tinfoil squares?
That is strange. Now it gives more like
totally
weird.
Uninhabited stretch of land. There is no one there to perform any sort of burial ritual. Even if we're willing to say that maybe one of the other fishermen buried Scott Moorman, well then where are the other fishermen? Some people wonder, are they still alive? So like many of my videos, unfortunately, there isn't really a good conclusion here. It just kind of ends.
I will say there's strangeness, but I don't know about that part.
If you included
why would, if they're still alive, why haven't they come back?
What do you think could be the reason behind
Just saying.
That 6-year gap? How can we account for those 6 years?
Yeah, there's like a weird amount of time that's different.
Taongi Atoll. I mean, my suggestion would be maybe the survey wasn't done very well and they just missed it. But
that could also be a big one.
Well, who buried Scott?
Because not always the government does the work correctly sometimes.
How did he come to be freshly buried 9.5 years after he disappeared? So lots of questions. I would love to hear
that is strange.
Your theories,
how did that
happen? Comments,
your
takeaways in the comments section. And again, if you liked this video, please hit like. Please click subscribe, turn on all notifications because I'm going to be posting stories.
Yeah, just letting him, say all the stuff they need. I always do that for all the videos. If they have something to plug, I try to let them plug it in. Because I want them to get all that credit. Obviously, if they're working videos, they need to get credit for it.
Mr. Ballin, one word, on every other social media platform. I post quite a bit on TikTok, so you can check me out over there. That's going to do it, guys. I hope that was interesting, and I look forward to reading your comments.
Well, that was an interesting story and mystery. There's not much I can add to these videos, like I said, when they're storying, because it's mostly story about somebody's life or what they did. I think it's more better to talk during, because I can remember during that video, at that moment, about that part, what happened, so that is a strange thing to happen, Timeline is weird, the effects of how the body and all that stuff and whatever happened is weird. In my theory, I think the government just didn't do it right. And they just... Because it doesn't make sense that for some reason they would be gone and then they would be back somehow after 6 years. And then jump forward to the 9-year mark where they say it was fresh. I don't believe that part about, that they did the survey right. At least that part. That's the one part I think that I believe is wrong. The survey wasn't done right. I don't know about what else happened, but the survey I feel like wasn't done right. But anyway, that was an interesting story, like the mystery, all that aspect. Who knows if they'll find information of what happened? Maybe, maybe not. But it was an interesting story. Sorry. If you want to check out this video and many others, go to Mr. Ballin channel. Check out, their channel, this video, many others. They got so many there. Please give those views. And hey, if you want to come back here and give us other views, that'd be great. We really could use the help. To get this channel to keep going, doing more content, and working on other things too. This is Speckblocklime. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification button to get notified about future videos. Try to put a link down below to whatever videos we're working on, other channels, and the social media. Hopefully that we have whatever we're able to post. Hopefully you guys are having a good time, good day. Take care of yourselves. See you guys on another video.